So to paint with today, we're going to use 3 colors. And if you don't have these colors, you can use colors that are similar. I usually only use 3 colors in class, 1 blue, 1 red, and 1 yellow. And so the blue is ultramarine blue, or like what I have is French ultramarine, very similar in color. The red that I use is alizarin crimson. So it's a nice dark red, but very transparent. And so is the ultramarine blue. And then we also have the Canyon Yellow Medium, or for some people, it says Canyon Yellow Hue on your tube. So with these 3 colors, we will be able to paint our painting today and make all the colors that are needed in here. Now, if you have a different blue, or if you have a different red, or if you have all sorts of other colors, you're free to use other colors as well. But I like to stay with the 3 primary colors so that it's not confusing which yellow are we using, which green are we using, which purple are we using. We're just using the 1 yellow, the 1 red, and the 1 blue, and we're making the colors. So for that reason, I always recommend to have a little test strip with you, which now I realize I left upstairs in my studio. But with a test strip, it's a little bit, you can put a little bit of paint like this, like I did on my paper towel here, to test if the color is correct. But you can do the same thing. So a test strip is just a little strip of watercolor paper that you cut out, and then you have it so you can test the colors. All right. So all right. So today we're going to start painting this. We're going to paint this. We're going to start today, and we're going to finish next week. So as we are painting, do not rush through the steps because we want to take the time to do it right. And that's why we're dedicating 2 classes to do this. So if you see the sky, it goes from dark towards light. And if you look at the water, it goes from light towards dark, just like it did on our drawing that we did. So when we did the drawing, the water went from light to dark, and the sky went from, dark to light, or light to dark. So to do this, it's going to require for us to do a graded wash in both cases. And so therefore, I thought that we could practice doing a graded wash on a separate paper, so that when we get to our beautiful painting that we're going to do, then you would have had the chance to practice. All right?
Yep.
So to do our practice of a graded wash, now what is a graded wash?
From light to dark.
So I have a couple of examples here. So in the red, you see how the red is pretty much the same tone and same color, from top to bottom. So that would be called a flat wash, because it's flat, it's not graded. So that means that to paint this, the same amount of pigment was used from top to bottom. Whereas on this one here, we have from dark to light. And so this would be called a graded wash. And actually, this is not a very well executed graded wash. I'm not sure. The person who did this made a slight mistake. Oh, right, I think it was me. Oh, well. So basically, this here is done by using more pigment towards the top, going to less pigment at the bottom. Or you could paint it upside down, start at the top with less pigment, and as you come down, do more and more pigments. So because both the sky and the water is going to be a graded wash, we're going to practice doing a graded wash twice. And to do this, you need another paper. So I hope you have one close by that you have prepared. And what I'd like you to do, if you haven't prepared it, is prepare a piece of paper and cut it in half with, separate it in half with a piece of tape in the middle. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to prepare that. I'm going to talk about the brushes. Someone was asking me about the brushes.
Me.
So to do a flat wash, you can use either a round brush or a filbert or a flat brush. So I have this beautiful little brush here that's very, very soft. This is a flat brush and it's very wide. And it's perfect for a flat brush, for a graded wash or a flat wash. This one is Grumbacher Golden Edge. It was given to me by someone. This is an 1.5 inches. The important thing is that the hair be very, very soft. And when you put it in the water, it gathers a lot of water, or when you put it in the pigment, it gathers a lot of pigment so that you can go ahead and paint with it without having to redip all the time. I can also use a filbert. This is my filbert that has a pointy edge. And this one also, it takes a lot of pigment when I dip it in. And so therefore I can do this. If your brushes are very small, like these ones, it'll be very, very difficult to do a nice graded wash that does not have lines. But if this is all that you have, then that's what you have to use. Now, I also want to show you this big thing here of a brush. It's almost like a makeup brush. And this brush is called a mop. This is good for a large flat wash. You can also use for a graded wash. But when using this, it's usually for a surface that does not require soft, hard edges, because it's really difficult to do, the sharp edge with this. So is there any questions about the brushes?
No.
All right. So we talked a little bit about the paint. To do our graded wash, what we're going to use is the French or the ultramarine blue, which is French ultramarine, the tube that I have. So we're going to use this. We are also going to use some of the yellow. And the yellow that we have now, that I have, is Canyon Yellow Medium. If you have a different kind of yellow, so you just use the yellow that you have. If you have a different kind of blue, use the blue that you have. In preparation to do the graded wash on here, we want to prepare some blue, and we also want to prepare some yellow, because if you look here at the bottom, there's a little bit of yellow in the bottom here. And the reason being that when we paint our sky, this here looks white, but it's actually a little bit of yellow mixed with a little bit of blue to do this part of the sky. And this part is very blue, but it still has a little bit of yellow in it. So that's why we want to prepare some blue and some yellow to do our graded wash exercise, because we're practicing the sky at this time. To do the blue, to prepare your blue, I usually use a small brush to prepare my colors so that I don't lose all of the pigments in the process. So I have this little palette which has little mixing wells, And in this case, you know, everything is dried up because I painted yesterday and dried overnight. But I can re-wet these colors, and they will work again. But basically, to prepare some of my blue, I'm just going to prepare a brand new well. I put some blue on the side of my well. I don't put it in the middle at the bottom, because as soon as I add water, I lose track of what amount of this has been diluted already. And then I dip my small brush into it, and I will add water from time to time, and I dilute it a little bit at a time. So now it's not even running. That means I need more water. I put it in the water, but I don't shake it in the water, because I don't want to lose the pigment that I've already captured with my brush. And then what I do is I go like this on the side, so that whatever pigment I have captured with my brush, I don't want to lose it. I won't leave it in the well. So I won't be able to do this whole process, but little by little, can't really see it because it's so dark. But now I still have some of this hard pigment here, see? And I need to dilute it in the water all the way until it's diluted. So I suggest you do that, and also prepare a well of yellow. And I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. Then we'll do our graded wash. Then I'll give you a chance. I'll give you a chance to do it afterwards. And for my first graded wash, I'm going to use this flat brush. And to do the graded wash, I'm going to first wet my paper, and then I'm going to paint it. So I dip my brush into water. Now this really gets a lot of water on it, so I probably just wet my paper this way. Oops, not enough water. There we go. Now, when you wet your paper, what happens is your paper gets very shiny from the water. And then as it dries, it becomes matte. Once it's matte, that's when it's time to paint. So I'm going to dip my brush into the blue. My well is not necessarily good, but I go like this just to make sure it's equally distributed. And then I'm going to start like this at the top, coming down with my brush without adding more pigment. I want to make sure that there's no lines. And as I come down now, I'm getting less and less pigment. And I don't want to go all the way to the bottom. I want to clean my brush, wipe it on the paper, get a little bit of my yellow. So I'm taking my yellow brush here, which I use for my yellow. I'm taking a little bit of yellow, putting it here, so that I can then dip my brush into a combination of the blue and the yellow. And because I don't want too much pigment, I'm dipping it into the water again. And I'm wiping it onto my my paper, and I'm going to paint with this, the bottom part. So there, now I have a graded wash. So your turn.
No.
Now we're going to do the other side. I mean, the other side. For me, I did both sides, so I'm just going to use a new paper. But for this graded wash, we're going to practice the water. The water goes here at the horizon line. It goes from a pink color towards a blue color, and it can go even darker than this at the bottom. And when doing the water, we want to reflect what we did on the drawing. So from very light towards a dark at the bottom. And this very light color is, we're going to do a pink. If you look at the ocean or at a lake, next time you're at a lake or in a place where there's water, if you look very closely, you'll see on the horizon line, there's almost like a little pink color. And so that's why we're going to represent this, and it helps to give a sense of depth to the water. So we're going to practice a graded wash going from a very light pink towards a blue at the bottom. And to do that, you have to have your red ready. So I have some red here in this well. You only need a little bit of red, and you need the blue. And you need to make sure that there's no yellow on your in the blue. No yellow in the blue, just blue. So that's why I'm removing this. Okay, so to do this, first I'm going to wet my paper. So I'm wetting my paper. Okay. And oops. I want to make sure that even though I wet my paper, it's not too shiny before I start painting. Okay, that's what I'm removing the water. And to put my my pink, I'm going to use a smaller brush, this one that I did dip in the water. I put it in the red, but the red is it's a very dark red, this alizarin crimson. I don't want it to be this dark. So I'm going to put it in the water, wipe it on the paper, and just make it lighter, a lighter color like this. And that's what I'm going to put up here. Very light pink, very light pink with my small brush. Then once I've done my light pink, then I can add my blue, starting with a very light blue, very, very light. So I go here and I just put a little bit of blue on my brush, very light blue. And then gradually I'll add more and more blue. More and more and more. Going towards the bottom with more blue. And then at the very bottom, it's going to be super blue. Of course, having a large brush like I do really helps, makes it easier.
You're supposed to do that?
But even now, see, I'm getting those lines that I don't really want. And at the bottom, it's going to be super dark. Making sure that your paper is wet before you start this exercise. And see, now I have a nice graded wash. That's not started with a very light pink only at the top and gradually migrate into a very light blue and goes towards a very dark blue at the bottom. So to do this, you need very little pigment on your brush for the red. And then when you start with the blue as well, then you add more and more pigment towards the bottom. You can use more pigment. So to do less pigment, you have to have more water. So to paint the painting, we have two choices. You guys can be on your own and paint the painting the best that you can, or I can do one step at a time and then give you time to paint it. We are now going to start painting the painting. So you can't really see very well, but I do have a tracing of my drawing on this watercolor paper. And the paper that I'm using to paint this painting is a student grade watercolor paper. It's the Michaels brand Artist Loft. The important thing is to have paper that is at least 140 pounds. See right here where my thumb is. This weight, it means it equates to a certain thickness of your paper. And the thicker your paper is, then the less it will tend to wave as you wet it. So 140 pounds is the minimum. It's very easy to find 140-pound paper, watercolor paper. There's also a 300-pound watercolor paper that is a lot thicker. But it's this is what professionals use when they do watercolor paper.
Claire, I have a question about your tracing paper.
Yes.
You mentioned you use tracing paper to transfer your sketch onto your paper. Well,
Yes.
how do you do that?
Oh, okay, that's a very good question. So this is what I do. So what I do is I take my drawing from my sketchbook, this drawing, I put the watercolor paper, the tracing paper on top, and I trace the main shapes onto the tracing paper.
Right.
Now, in order to transfer okay, hold on. Accident, I had an accident. In order to transfer what I captured on my tracing paper, to transfer it onto the watercolor paper, I have two choices. I can use transfer paper. Now it's like a carbon paper that I can put right here onto my watercolor paper. I put the tracing paper on top and I trace. This will transfer my drawing onto my watercolor paper. So that's one option.
Carbon paper.
But that's not the option that I use. The second option, which is my preferred option, what I do is I turn the tracing paper to reveal the back of it and putting like a blank surface underneath. Then what I do is I take a pencil and I trace every line on the back of it. What it does is it puts lead on the back of my image. Once this is done, then that's when I turn it upside up and I put it on my watercolor paper. Oops. And when I trace it, it will transfer onto the watercolor paper very lightly.
Okay.
And this will have the effect of transferring the drawing onto the watercolor paper very lightly. As you can see, it's very lightly done.
Right.
But it's also erasable. If I want to erase one line, move one line, or if I want to make it lighter, I can.
Right.
If I use carbon paper, it's impossible to erase. And
Okay.
it's very dark. So I'm just going to do a quick demonstration here like this. So over here, let's say I have this shape like this.
Yeah.
so it doesn't transfer onto my watercolor paper. But if I trace it on the back of it, right here, and I put something neutral under, because otherwise, if I do this onto my watercolor paper, it will transfer when I do this. Now I
Right.
trace it upside up, and I go like this,
Yep.
and now it has transferred onto my watercolor paper.
Wow. Wow, that's cool.
So that's how I do this. Now, because I did this, that way I can erase this line that I did here easily, because it's just pencil line. That was an excellent question.
Thank
Okay,
you.
we're gonna start this painting by painting the sky. We're gonna do our graded wash on the sky. This is not behaving like I would like it to. Just gonna go like this and put this here so you can see what we're doing. Okay. Okay, so we're gonna start with the sky. Now at the top of the sky, we have a darker blue. At the bottom of the sky, we have a much lighter blue that has a little bit of yellow in it. So to paint this, because we want to make sure that when we paint the sky, it doesn't drip towards the bottom, I'm going to put my drawing, which is like this. I'm going to put my drawing upside down. So I'm going to paint the sky upside down. Now this surface here is the sky, and I'm going to paint the sky. One thing that I want to say is when I wet the paper for the sky, I will wet all of this, including the mountains. And I will paint all of this as the sky. After it's dry, we're going to add the mountain on top. Okay, so you want to paint all of this section, including the mountains and the tree. All the lines that you've traced, they will show through this because we're painting very, very, very lightly. Okay, so to do the sky, we're going to prepare for a graded wash. So we want to prepare some of the blue and we want to prepare some of the yellow. Now, if I have some of the yellow and the blue ready already because I prepared a lot before, I'm ready to paint, which is my case. So I'm going to put this upside down right here on display to show that this is where we are painting upside down. My sky is right here. So I'm going to wet, I'm going to take my big brush. It's got to be completely clean. And I'm going to wet all of my sky, including the mountains. With a big brush, it's easier to wet quickly. And I want to make sure that my line here is straight, the horizon line. I'm going over the tree, over the mountains, and I'm wetting this whole section. There we go. Now this is all wet. And now what I'm going to use is I'm going to use a little bit, very little bit of a mix of the yellow and the blue, very little of it. That's why I am drawing it on, I am wiping it on my paper. I don't want it to be completely green. It's got to be very, very light, because if you look here, it almost looks white. And then I'm going to use this to do this portion. Whoops. Now it's too light. very light color. Like so. So you can watch the demonstration and do it after, or you can do it at the same time as me. It's up to you. So this whole section is like this. And now I'm going to add a little bit more blue to the mix of the blue and the yellow. I want to try and avoid lines. And even more blue up here. And more blue, depending on if you want it to be a dramatic or not too dramatic. That's what will decide how much darker you get towards the top. There we go. Now to create the effect of the cloud, you can wet a brush, a small brush, and dry it, and then remove a little bit of this pigment while it is still wet. So, and it will create the effect of clouds. Now I have done, oops, there's water here. So now I have done my sky with a little bit of a cloud effect. Now that we have painted the sky, the next item, if we're going to paint from back to front, the next item that is far away is this mountain here that is kind of a purplish. On our photo, this mountain is kind of bluish, a very light blue. So you can paint it a very light blue. In this case, I had added a little bit, just a teeny little bit of red. You don't want it to be completely dark purple, but you can add just a teeny little bit of red in the blue. So we're going to paint this mountain right here. And closer to the horizon line, there is kind of like a piece of land that comes forward. So this here can be just a little darker, which is what I had done. To do this, now I have my sky here like this. I'm going to put it sideways. And by doing so, I can paint this section without having this drip towards the bottom or towards my sky. So I'm going to put it sideways. I'm going to take a smaller brush to paint this. But if you have a brush like this, for example, with a pointy, with a very pointy tip, you can paint this with this brush. I'm just going to use this one. I like this round brush for this. So before you paint this, make sure your brush is completely clean. And you want to have a very light blue. In my case, I'm going to get just a little bit of red in it. Just a little tinge, not too much. And I'm going to paint it with this. Now, the color that you want, I'm just going to show you on my paper towel. So you want something like this. That's a color and the tone that you want. Not too dark, not too light. Has to appear like it's coming, it's far away. So just starting like this. And you have to paint really fast. If you don't feel like you can paint fast enough, you should first wet this section before you paint it. But since I paint pretty fast, I did not wet it first.
Did you add a little bit of red?
I did add a teeny little bit of alizarin crimson. Yes, I did. So it gave me the effect of having almost like a little bit of a purplish mountain. And at the bottom, I add more pigment to do like a little, almost like land that comes forward just here in this area. On the photo, that's how it was. So it gives me this. So when something like this happens, see here, this line, I want it to be extremely straight, but I have this little thing that happened where I went below my line.
Mhm.
When this happens, you take a small brush and you dry the brush as much as you can on your paper towel or a rag. And using this very pointed brush, what you want to do is you just want to wet this little area. Now I got to be very careful. You want to form the new line. And with a dry paper towel, dry what you've done. So now it does no longer shows. All right, like I said, I'm not saying that you will ever do any kind of mistakes like I just did, but just in the odd chance that it might happen to you too. Now I'm going to paint.
You're very tactful.
We're going to paint now this mountain. This mountain here, I'm going to show it on this one. We're going to paint this mountain here. Now, what color is this mountain if you look at the photo that we had last week? So if you look at that photo, it looks like a grayish brown color. So it's still in the background. It's much further away than any of this, the water or the rocks or the path or the tree. So in this portion of our painting, on this example that I have, I made it very brown. I think what I'm going to try this time is I'm going to do a very light purple. So this one was kind of a light bluish gray. So in this one, we're going to do a purple. So by mixing the ultramarine blue and the alizarin crimson, and just add a teeny little bit of yellow. So that's what we're going to mix to do this paint, this portion. So if I show it here, how I mix this. So I use some blue. And now I'm going to I'm cleaning my brush. I'm getting some red. So I'm getting a purple. Excuse me. This is the color that I have right now. It's like a very dark purple. Too much pigment to paint this. But nevertheless, using this purple, now I'm going to add a little bit yellow. Taking another brush that is clean to take just a little teeny little bit of yellow. So see, now I have a little bit of yellow here that I'm taking, just a little bit of it. I'm getting a purple that now is too dark, so I'm getting more water. And if I do my test strip, which I don't have, so I'm going to do it here, it's giving me still quite dark. More water. So it's going to give me this color is what I'm going to use to paint this section. Now to paint this section, I'm going to put it sideways with the sky on the right and the land on the left. And before I paint it, I'm going to wet this section. Excuse me. So using my small brush, I want to wet it, but not too wet. Starting here Now be extra careful when you wet this. You don't want to go too much over the line, but it is acceptable to go over the tree to do this, over the tree trunk. And wetting all of this. There we go. Okay, now I'm taking the brush that I did my mix with. I'll make sure it's not too dark. A little bit more water. Oh, it's too light. A little too light. There we go. This is better. So this land to appear a little bit more in front as well. It's hard to paint with showing you guys without putting my brush in the way. I'm just going to paint it and show you after. Sorry about that.
You're going over the tree?
I am going over the tree. Well, actually, when it comes to the tree, I did go over the tree with the water, but when I paint it, I'm just going to stop where the tree is, like so. But since I didn't wet with a very wet brush, then it's not going to matter too much and it's not going to drip. So now I have done this, and just going to add a little bit more yellow to my mix to do the next part. There we go. And it's okay if the colors are not completely flat, because this is a grouping of trees. So gives you something like this. Now your turn. To paint our water, we are going to do another graded wash. This time the graded wash will go from pink to light blue to darker blue. And so if we look on this one, this example here, there's a very teeny little line of pink here towards the horizon. And then it goes from light blue to darker blue to even darker blue. And it goes all the way alongside of the rocks. So to paint this,
So do we paint over the rocks or not?
we do not paint over the rocks. Before I start painting this, I have to make sure I have blue ready and I have red ready, which I currently do. So I can just go right ahead and start. But I'm going to clean my palette. There we go. Okay, very good. And so before I start painting this part, I'm going to leave it like this. I recommend that you put it sideways, but just so you see what I do, I'm gonna leave it like this. It's easier for me to go like this when it's sideways this way, when it's upside up. So taking a clean brush, I am going to wet the water, the section of the water. So starting like this in the corner here. I'm not going to wet the rocks, but I will do the contour of the rocks very neatly. With my little brush, average size brush, I'd say. You don't want to put too much water when wetting the water section. you do want to make sure that when you wet the water on the horizon line, it's very straight and it actually touches the section that we've already painted. You don't want a white line between the water and the mountain. Once it's all wet, then I'm taking my round brush with a little water, with a little red. I don't want the red to be too pink. So I want something, so this would be a little too pink. I'm adding more water. So this is a little bit less pink. Yeah, this will be good. So now I'm gonna go and put this nice pink color on the horizon, like so. Not sure that you guys can see this. I've decided to go a little darker with my pink. There. And now that I've put my pink, I can clean my brush, dip in the blue, and I want a very light blue. So I don't want to go with a very dark blue right next to my pink. I want to overlap the two colors. That's why we paint wet on wet. Alongside of the rocks without touching the rocks. And as I come down, I want to go a little darker with my blue without creating too much lines. And closer to the rocks will be where you want the darkest to be, because the rocks at the bottom will be lighter on the edge. And so therefore, will appear very nicely against the dark water. So here at the bottom, I have my darkest
Claire, how'd you make the light blue?
blue with a lot of water.
A lot of water, okay.
So now I have my
Yeah.
water that's like this. I realize here I have lighter spots, which I don't want.
I'm gonna need some help.
I add more pigment to give a darker blue. There. I have my water.
Very nice.
And you can already see the profile of the rocks against the water.
Yep.
We still have 5 minutes, and I want to do a little demonstration on how to paint the rocks.
Yes.
Now, I'm not asking you to paint at the same time as me. I'm going to paint quickly, but just to show you. So we have a very light drawing of the rocks, just a few rocks at the bottom. Okay, I did not draw all the rocks up above. And as a first step, I recommend that you do a very light overall gray. And to do this, what I do is I basically, it's It's a blue with just a teeny little bit of yellow, but very light. That means a lot of water, and it will give me a color that is like this.
Oh, wow.
And so I go here with this color and I paint the rocks with this very light color, following. So I've made it bigger just so that you can see correctly. So I'm just going over the whole rocks with this very light color, very light gray
Which is blue and a tiny bit
of yellow.
of yellow. And lots of water.
So I'm just going over this. I did not wet it first. I'm painting fast, but when you do it, I would suggest that you first wet it. The reason that we're doing this is so that we don't have any white spots on our rocks. It's got to be a very light gray, because otherwise, if it's too dark, then it's going to fight with the shadowy area that we're going to paint after. So because I painted with very little water, and then even though it's not completely wet, I can already go ahead and paint some of the shadow. So to paint the shadow, I take some red and some blue. So my alizarin crimson mixed with some of my ultramarine blue, which gives me a very deep, deep purple. And I'm going to start by indicating some of the shadow on this rock here. So by indicating the shadow, it gives me, a shape of the other rocks that are around it. And also it gives me an idea of the overall shape of my rock. And I had traced around those areas so that I can follow them. So this one's like this, and then there is this one here. Like so. Now I know that along the side here will probably be all dark along the side of the little cement wall.
Yep.
So I'm still using my deep purple here. So there is this bottom rock here. It also might require some of this deep purple. To make the deep purple,
Mute.
I've only used, okay, so
I'm
whoever is
sorry.
talking,
I'm shutting it off.
please mute yourself. Thank you. So I have also this deep purple is made with a mix of my blue and my red. I have another one here. That's the back of this rock. I could be looking at my drawing to follow these patterns. I could be looking at my photo. And now I'm removing a little bit of pigment so that I can go with a lighter version of this purple. And now I'm cleaning my brush. I'm adding a little bit of the yellow to the purple, making it lighter color, a little bit like this. Lighter color, kind of brownish color. And so I can go over a certain section of my rock, and it's okay if it mixes with the other colors. And if it bleeds, it's also okay. It's also acceptable. Rocks are never very, very square. too dark, a little too dark for over here. There, good. It's already shaping up like rocks. Now this one in the background. Be like this. This is also shadow, but a lighter version of the shadow. Much lighter. Now this over here is my pointy rock. And it's got interesting colors to it. And then I have, when I come up here, my my rocks are even darker and bluer. As they recede, the rocks will get bluer. And if you look at the photo, these rocks are actually just darker, and they become darker than the water. Everything is relative. So up here, it's still a little lighter than the water. And then it just becomes darker than the water. So I'm just gonna, in this section, like a solid color, because I don't want to put any detail in this section of the rocks. And a little darker on the edge.
Is that your purple, Claire?
This is, it's more of a indigo. So indigo has more blue in it than purple. Because as I recede, it gets a little lighter and lighter. So I don't want it to be too dark. Indigos can be a little lighter than the purple. This is my my nice, I'm adding a little orange to this mix because this is my funny pointed rock. It's got some funny colors to it. This one here delimits this one. So rocks is as much about painting the rock itself as it is about painting the shadow of the rock next to it. So like, for example, here, I'm going to add this shadow of the rock above. Which will help with forming the other rocks. And then sometimes just a tinge of color that I created by just adding more water to the same color. This rock here needs a little bit of darkness down here, like so. And all the rocks are connected. So you don't necessarily want to have a rock that's in on its own and is not connected to the one next to it. Meaning you don't want to have white spaces between the rocks. And varying between these colors is a good idea because rocks are rarely a flat color. Very rarely are they a flat color. Oops, forgot to do this dark area with my purple down here. And so now, have to look at these rocks and see what's happening with them. Do they look like rocks? Do they look like funny shapes that don't really seem to be rocks? What do I gotta do? Referring back to your drawing, referring back to the photo. These are all good ways to see if your rocks read like rocks, if you're unsure. Now I have rocks. Okay, so when nobody talks, that means that show you a recording of how I painted it. Voila.
That was so quick.
You're good, Claire.
Yeah.
Want to see it again?
Sure.
Yep.
I like this. So I painted first the sky, then the water, then I painted the mountains, then the grass, the rocks, the pathway, and the little cement wall after that. Then I finished with the tree. And its shadow. I will make this available to you guys